I'm with Ambassador Pankaj Saran, India's former ambassador to Russia from 2016 to 2018, and subsequently India's Deputy National Security Advisor from 2018 to 2021, and Professor Rajesh Rajagopalan, a professor of international relations at the School of International Studies at Delhi's Jawaharlal Nehru University. And today we're discussing the crisis in Ukraine. On Thursday morning, Russia's President Vladimir Putin shocked the world by conducting a special military operation in Ukraine. Of course, the world has come down like a ton of bricks, and we will go into all those issues. But before I do that, let me welcome you both, gentlemen. Welcome to The Print.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jyoti.
Thank you for having us.
Ambassador Saran, can I start with you first? Your first reaction to what's happening in Ukraine, just to sort of lay the stage, if you like. President Putin, as we all know by now, the whole world knows that a special military operation has been conducted in Ukraine. We don't know exactly what that means, so that's why it's in within quotes, a special military operation. The US President Joe Biden has said that the world will hold Russia accountable. Putin has responded by saying that he has issued a threat to anyone who tries to interfere. Again, that's within quotes. The Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, has severed diplomatic ties with Russia. That was expected, of course. And one of his advisors, that is President Zelensky's advisors, has said that more than 40 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed and several have been wounded. Now, blasts have been heard in Kiev and Kharkiv, which is Ukraine's second largest town, very much on the border, very close to the border between Russia and Ukraine, and Kramatorsk, which is in the region of Donetsk, one of the two oblasts, one of the two provinces that the Russian president Vladimir Putin has claimed, and where he said whose independence he has recognized. But to you, Ambassador Saran, first, your first comments on this earth-shaking development.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me to your show. Well, I would like to just begin by saying that this is a very somber moment in global affairs. And whatever we make out of it, I think it is absolutely important as Indians, we make as correct an assessment as we can based on the information that is available. Because in such kinds of situations, getting accurate information is at a premium. Mm-hmm. And the two sides are, at this point, completely caught up in a very heated state of emotion and public posturing. Mm-hmm. And since we are some distance away, both physically and otherwise, I think it is incumbent on us to step back, take, as I said, a measured view of what is happening, what are the implications, and then try and understand from an Indian perspective what are going to be the implications, what we can do, etc.
Okay, but Ambassador Saran, tell me, do you think India should condemn this invasion?
I don't think so. There are, again, in this conflict, as in many conflicts, the use of lexicon, terminologies, etc., become very, very important.
Okay.
I mean, we are no stranger to that. I mean, we know what we called the liberation of Goa. We know what we called the entry of Sikkim into the Indian Union. So I would say that before we begin to take positions, mm-hmm. We should actually, and we are now more mature actually, 75 years of experience. So we should be much more measured. And jumping to kind of simplistic reactions, I do not think would behove a country like ours. There are certainly others who will definitely do it. I mean, the Western Alliance has issued a few statements.
Yes.
The Russians have issued, etc. But they're parties to the conflict. So I would like to just discuss this further with you as we go along.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Professor Rajagopalan, your first comments on the situation at hand. And your comments, also your views on what you think India should do.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you for inviting me to join your show. I think, we have been headed in terms of global politics towards great power competition that has for some time, partly because of China's rise, but also because of the growing entente between Russia and China.
Mhm.
So, and the sort of the conflict that Russia has been having with the West, with Europe, with the United States, and so on. So, I think this sort of pushes everything into high gear, as it were. It is not new in that sense, in the sense that we were already headed in this direction,
Right.
but it is definitely something that is accelerates the whole process. And there are, I would agree with Ambassador Saran that there are moments in time when in international politics, particularly that a certain amount of clarity suddenly uh, happens as a consequence of major events, whether it is collapse of the Soviet Union or the end of the Second World War, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So this is one of those moments of clarity. I think whatever hopes there have been since the end of the Soviet Union, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, for a more peaceful world order, for greater cooperation and for greater trade and so on and so forth.
Okay.
That I think is conclusively over as of today. I think what we are seeing is that we already saw with the meeting in Beijing between the leaders of with Putin and Xi, and we are sort of seeing that become much more solid. So that is, so in a sense, very clearly.
Would you condemn what Russian President Vladimir Putin has done? Should India condemn what the Russian president has done?
No, I don't think India should necessarily condemn it, but I think India should be careful about not seen to be justifying or seen to be approving of this action. And I think, unfortunately, what has come through in our all sides point of view at the UN is we are seen as not really, even without condemning it, I think we could have been somewhat stronger in our statement in terms of at least defending some principles. And I don't think we have done that. And I think that sort of that is not necessarily the best way, I would think, that we could have.
What kind of principles are you talking about? Democracy, freedom,
Ukraine is a member state of the UN, and it is a member state that is now currently under attack, not just under attack, but potentially about to be swallowed up by Russia. I mean, I think that is something that is quite dramatic, and it is something that we could have, we could have stuck to principles. We could have stuck to principles about sovereignty and independence and so on and so forth, which are principles that we have historically held since 1947. So I think those principles, at least reiterating those principles, I think would have been useful, not the kind of stand that we have taken.
Ambassador Saran, I think Professor Rajagopalan has a point. India is the largest democracy in the world. And surely even at the UN Security Council, before the attack on Ukraine, when India's permanent representative, Mr. Tirumurti, Ambassador Tirumurti, expressed deep concern, but did not condemn Russia's actions. Now, today, of course, those actions Putin has overstepped that line. But would you say that India should have been more vocal and more sort of critical?
Yeah, I would answer this in two parts. Number one is the historical precedent. And number two is the question of the balance between principles and interests. Mm-hmm. Now, on the first part, to be fair to everyone, this is not the first cataclysmic event that we are witnessing in our adult memory. I mean, we have been witness to, for example, the invasions of Iraq, of Libya, of Syria. Mm-hmm. We have seen what happened in Afghanistan. Contrary-wise, we have also seen other developments in the past in Europe. So this is not as if we have not faced such history-changing events. Number one. Number two, on the question of interests, on the question of principles and interests, yes, these are unexceptionable kind of sentiments to hold, that India has a certain responsibility to uphold some principles.
Right.
But I have to just ask myself that what principles are the parties to the conflict upholding?
What does that mean?
What I mean to say is that it's a clear divide today. It may not be a few years down the line, but both sides insist that whatever actions they are taking are in pursuance and in furtherance of certain principles of international law.
No, but Ambassador Saran, I mean, what the Russian president has done is very clear. Now, he may claim the rebel-held districts or oblasts of Donetsk and Lugansk, but they are still part of Ukraine. So for him to overstep the line, don't you agree that he's overstepped the line by going into another country? Now, videos on the internet, and I've seen two on the New York Times, where Russian troops, in their tanks, and you see troops standing outside Kharkiv, which is the town just across the border from Russia. You can hear blasts, or again online, we've seen videos where blasts have been heard in Kiev, in Kharkiv, and in some other parts of the country. So wouldn't you say that President Putin has overstepped that red line?
I don't think he has overstepped any line. I mean, if you read his two speeches made in the last, say, 72 hours,
okay,
they give you a background and a perspective of the background and the thought process in the mind of the Russian state as to why he has done what he has done. And in his mind and in the minds of the Russians, there is a different interpretation to exactly what you have said. There is no black and white in this game, or it's not a game, it's much more serious.
Right. Yes.
But there is no simple black and white. If you were to look at the statements of the NATO and maybe later today, the European Union, etc., you would see a different picture. Whereas if you look at the Russian statements, you look at a very different picture. What I'm trying to say is that you have mentioned a couple of principles: democracy, sovereignty, territorial integrity. Right. But I can add another two principles to this. I can add the principle of equal and indivisible security. So the list of so-called principles is actually quite endless. And both sides are using the garb of principles to further national interest. These are hard powers. These are not moralistic states on either side. They are guilty, both sides, of committing and entering into wars which have resulted in the deaths of millions and millions of people. And countries like us have been mute witnesses to these events. We were not a party to the 1991 dissolution. We had no role to play in that.
Right.
So we have gone through these events. I think today the difference between 1991 and 2022 is that as a nation, we are more mature, we have more experience in judging, in assessing, and understanding with an open mind, with an objective mind, and look at it only from the prism of what affects us, what are the implications for us, and we can discuss that.
Professor Rajagopalan, wouldn't you agree with that?
No, I might agree with some parts of that.
Okay.
But I don't think security and indivisible security and so on are principles that the UN upholds. I mean, I think those are general political principles and power principles that are fine. I mean, I don't think that is that is a perfectly fine justification. But those are not legal principles like territorial sovereignty and territorial integrity and national sovereignty. I think those are well-established principles that are upheld within international law. And I mean, I agree with Ambassador Saran that these are not simply a question of principles, and it's a question of interest. And obviously, that is one of the reasons why I was suggesting that we don't have to condemn Russia. I mean, that is, we are not, we don't have to.
And I'd like to say, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I would like to say here that by Thursday evening, when we are recording this episode, the Ministry of External Affairs has not issued any statement. So there's been no condemnation or criticism or anything in between. Go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, so sure. I mean, I think we should take our time to sort of come up with a proper response, even though given how clear these events were going to turn out to be, I think we should have thought about this a bit earlier, but nevertheless, I mean, I think we should take our time and sort of come up with a proper response. But the point is not about just what principles, it is also about our interests. And our interest today is in making sure that we have partners and friends. And right now, I'm not sure, whether any of our partners or friends would necessarily be happy with the kind of stand that we have taken, even without, again, nobody's asking us to condemn
Who are
Russia,
our partners and friends that you think that
the United States, many of the countries in East Asia, Japan, others who have already condemned the Russian action. These are all partners that we need in the coming years because our interests are in the Indo-Pacific. I mean, it doesn't really matter to us what happens in one sense directly. It doesn't affect us what happens in Central Europe. But it does matter. The blowback from that could potentially affect us. And I think we could have been a little bit that national interest, that self-interest is something that we should keep in mind because Russian actions do have a direct impact on us because our primary adversary, without any question, is China. And if China and Russia are coming together, then that is a problem that we face, and we do need partners to make sure that
are China and Russia coming together, Professor? I mean, that's a question.
Yeah, I think the evidence on that is fairly clear. Over the last several years, they have increasingly seen eye to eye on global issues.
Okay.
They are very critical of the whole Indo-Pacific concept of the Quad. Things that we need for our security are things that they are both united in opposing. So in essence, they are together when it comes to what are essentially Indian national security interests. And so I think that is something that we need to keep in mind when we think about Russia's actions. I mean, again, Russia is a friend. We do continue to need Russia, but we are in a bit of a jam, obviously. So we have to, that's why I said don't have to condemn Russia because we do continue to need Russia, but we also need others because the direction that this particular region, the region that our national security and the Indo-Pacific region is going, we are going to need other partners who would help us in dealing with our threats and our problems. And I think that is something that should be at the forefront of our minds.
That's a fair assessment, Ambassador Saran, that if you don't hang with the Americans, especially when they need you at this time, the Americans have got all their allies on board in Europe and elsewhere. Israel, for example, has condemned the Russian action. Actually, so far, the only big power that has not condemned the Russian action is China. The Chinese are being very careful. They've called it, they've said that the issue is very complicated. But Ambassador Saran, the fact that if China is your adversary, your main adversary, Chinese troops are sitting on your border in Ladakh, shouldn't you be more careful about what you should do with the Russians?
Yeah, look, I think a lot has been said. And I would like to kind of unpack this a bit by bit. Of course, we have partners and we have friends. We don't have allies, actually. But the fact is that your partners and friends have, over the last few years, pursued a certain path with their primary adversary. And I do not recall they're ever consulting us or keeping us informed about what they plan to do with regard to their primary adversarial relationship.
You're talking about the Americans.
I'm talking about the Americans, the NATO, the European Union. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, in this particular episode, we are basically faced with a fait accompli. The event has been done. We are told that this has happened, and now you are required, or we expect you to take a certain position. So that's the first point with regard to partners and friends. The second...
Can you give me an example of that?
Example of what?
Of the Americans telling you after the deed is done to say that, okay, now this has happened. Now either you're with us or against us.
No, I'm responding to what you were suggesting, that there is some expectation you feel, in your opinion, that we should be in some way...
hang together with our allies.
Yes, be more understanding of the American or the NATO or the Western positions. That's the first point. Second point is, my point to you is that partners and friends, if they are true to you, would keep you informed. We need not be allies. Second, that's the first point. Second point is, when it comes to our own interests, yes, there is the India-China parallel, but I can think of many other parallels or comparisons between the situation there and the situation as it pertains to our own subcontinent. I would like to just put it in a very abstract fashion. What you have basically is the disintegration of an empire, the creation of a large chunk of that empire, and 15 smaller parts of that empire. One of those parts, after creation and after being granted the independence that they sought, has consistently decided to provoke and confront the primary inheritor of that bigger empire. And
but that's 30 years ago, Ambassador Saran. Ukraine became one of the 15 republics when the Soviet Union broke up. But that's 30 years ago. Today, even if there has been animosity, and even if the Western countries led by the Americans,
but let me finish.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So they have taken this decision. Number one. Number two, they have also taken a decision to bring in external powers and external alliances to bolster their felt insecurities against this bigger nation. Frankly, you have been in this business for as long as I have. And who do you think this kind of a situation pertains to when it comes to our own subcontinent? Do we not know what happens when there is a dissolution of an empire? There is the creation of a new state on your border. The new state is, from its birth, hostile to you. That new state takes it as a cardinal principle of strategic and security policy to invite outside powers, to militarize it to its teeth, with the express purpose of making your life and your national security extremely vulnerable. And the third party which is invited to this paradigm is also coming with the intention to ensure that your national security remains under a peril all the time. And you are therefore living with this constant fear across your land border that if not today, then tomorrow, there will be something which may happen, which may directly impact your core national security interest.
Okay. Professor Rajagopalan, obviously Ambassador Saran is making the comparison with Pakistan. So when India India becomes independent or gets partitioned in 1947 between India and Pakistan, it's Pakistan that's sitting on your head, or it's the monkey on your back. Now, is that comparison with Russia and Ukraine? Is that do you think that's valid?
I hate to disagree with Ambassador Saran, somebody with so much experience, but the point is that it's not really parallel in that sense that we haven't tried to take over Pakistan. I mean, we have repeatedly been attacked by Pakistan. We have been inflicted with several wars from 48, 65, 70 war, then 99, and continuous acts of terrorism against us. This is not parallel.
No, but
this is not parallel with that. Exactly, but there is no parallel in the Ukraine-Russia case. I mean, it's not as if Ukraine has been attacking, has gone to war with Russia, nor is it the question of it is actually Ukrainian territory that Russian forces have already been in for several years. So,
but I think what he's also, sorry to interrupt you, but he's also saying that when you remember the Maidan Revolution, for example, so the Americans, so that's the third power that he's referring to, which was very much part of that so-called Maidan or the democracy or the pro-democracy revolution, again, all those within quotes, pro-democracy revolution, and instigating or trying to unsettle the Russians, which is the big power next door.
Yeah, I mean, my point is that doesn't constitute an attack on Russia. I mean, that is the fact that there is an internal change in Ukraine does not mean that's an attack on Russia. I mean, I know so that I think that parallel there would be if we were constantly attacking we were trying to engage in a war of annihilation against Pakistan, then the parallel might be appropriate. But that is not the case here. It is a smaller country that's constantly been attacking us. It's not the smaller country that has been attacking Russia. So in any case, I think the larger point is we could get into. I don't think it is fair or we are going to sort of adjudicate properly who's at wrong, who's at fault, or who's correct. I mean, that is, we can always find plenty of things that all sides have done in any of these situations.
Right.
The point, I think, the issue to look at is not so much whether Russia is justified or whether Russia is, whether Ukraine is justified and whatnot. I mean, I think the issue here really is about what the impact this has on the international political system and what impact that has, therefore, on India. I mean, I think that is the key issue.
That's my next question. What do you think is going to be the impact on India as well as the global world order?
Yeah, I think we have been seeing bits of this from at least 2014. But what we have been witnessing is a growing camaraderie between a sort of an entente between Russia and China. And today, especially after the meeting in Beijing last month or a couple of weeks back, it is very clear that it is an alignment of sorts. And we have seen even today, I think there was a call between Lavrov and the Chinese foreign minister. And the Russian readout, at least, is quite, seems to almost suggest that the Chinese agreed with them. But the Chinese readout, I'm not very clear exactly what the Chinese readout of that is. But The point is that they are increasingly aligned, if not allied. And so considering our own dependence on Russia for military equipment and so on, and considering the fact that China is without any question, our greatest adversary, our most dangerous threat, I think we need to be very careful about the conditions that we find ourselves in today. And these conditions today is that we are finding efforts by combined effort by Russia and China to undermine the United States. And if they succeed, I think we'll be the ones who suffer, because without the US anchoring a balance in the Indo-Pacific, there will be no balance in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, no, I look at one level, what Professor Rajagopalan is saying is valid. But what I would say here is, precisely for the reasons that he is saying, the question will arise and has arisen is that has the United States and has NATO internalized the fact or internalized or made an assessment about which power, which country constitutes a threat to the kind of global order that they have single-handedly established after World War II. They have to ask themselves this question. And
that's a fair point, but I think Professor Rajagopalan's point is also that if the US is anchoring, the sort of a coalition of allies in the Indo-Pacific, India is very much part of the Quad, for example, then India has to be careful about the friendships that it picks. In this particular case, if the Chinese and the Russians are hanging together, then India has to be wary about where this is going and how it's unfolding.
No, we can have a separate discussion on the Russia-China relationship. It's a layered relationship. It is, once again, it's not a headline relationship. But all I'm trying to tell you is that if China was such a threat to the Western alliance, they seem to be spending a lot of time trying to counter the so-called Russian threat, rather than focusing their material, political, diplomatic energies on addressing a threat which, by all assessments, is a present and future threat. After all, when in 1991, it was agreed that the Cold War had been finished, there was one victor, there was one vanquished, but yet we see, tragically, that even 30 years after the end of the dissolution of the Soviet Empire, it seems as if in some quarters, the world has not changed for them. And this is something which, as India, is a problem for us. Now, how are we to go to Western chancelleries and talk to them and explain to them? Do they not see what we see? And if they do not see what we see, we are in even a bigger problem.
What do you see?
And if they see what we see, and yet they're not doing anything about it, we are still in a problem.
So what is it that you see?
Well, obviously, it is now accepted wisdom that we have an emergence of a new power on the global stage, which has risen dramatically in the last 40 years. All estimates are that this particular power is going to rise consistently forward. Now, the question is, how do we respond to this power, which happens to be our land neighbor?
Yeah.
And what are the instruments of policy that we have to deal with this rise? And what kind of a modus vivendi we develop to handle this thing. Right. What has happened in the last few weeks and months and years since 2014, unfortunately, shows that we are stuck in Europe.
That's a fair point, isn't it, Professor Rajagopalan, that even though I think you and Ambassador Saran agreed that China is India's, say, principal adversary, you also say that China is also America's principal adversary. But if that were true, then the Americans would not be as obsessed with Russia as they have been in the past few weeks. I mean, you look at every headline in every Western newspaper, it's all about, disciplining Vladimir Putin. There's not one word about China. China is off the charts.
If I may interject, I know,
okay.
Professor.
No, go ahead, sir.
If you don't mind, but
go ahead.
Chain of thought.
Please go ahead.
If you look at these two speeches, actually, President Putin has said, "Look, we lost the Cold War. The Soviet Empire disappeared." He says, "I accept it all. I'm not saying we won it. I'm saying to you, we got defeated. And I'm saying we had 15 countries." So he's accepting all that. But the fact of the matter is, and this is a bigger question, it cannot be done in a 10-minute interview, that for various reasons, the Western civilization, as we understand it, the Euro-Atlantic community of nations, is not apparently internally come to a strategic consensus on what to do with Russia and how to live with Russia.
Professor?
I mean, if, for example, Russia was the victor in the Cold War, for example, but here you pursued a certain policy from 1950s till 1989, 1991, and that was successful. You achieved the demolition and the dissolution of communism.
Right.
And he said it. If Ukraine wants to decommunize, I'm fine with it. You can break all the statues of Lenin. But the Russia-Ukraine, we have to understand a simple point, is a fight within a family. And that family is defined as religion, it's defined as language, it is defined as culture. And again,
it's an odd way, Ambassador Saran, to show affection and love by fighting against your own family, even if you're talking about common religions and ethnicity and culture, isn't it?
Well, I would ask you to go and interview a few of the Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Sri Lankans, and Nepalese to find out what it means to share common ethnic, cultural, linguistic, religious commonalities.
Okay, let me ask you, Professor, the other point about China. China being India's principal adversary as well as America's principal adversary. But the Americans seem to be spending a lot of their time actually trying to discipline the Russian president.
Yeah, I mean, they have been trying very hard to sort of focus on the Indo-Pacific. They have been redeploying some of their forces. The Quad was set up. The AUKUS. I mean, I think there is a growing focus on China. But the problem is that if Russia is threatening Europe, then they will respond. I mean, the point is that
how is Russia threatening Europe?
Because Russia seems to want to undo what happened at the end of the Cold War. The Baltic states, I mean, maybe Finland, Sweden, I mean, all of them are seeking, not the Baltic states are already in the NATO, of course, but Finland, others are already discussing joining NATO precisely because of the threat that Putin seems to be presenting to them. So they are not going to, if the only way that Russia can be satisfied and safe is by controlling Europe, which is what seems to be the case, which is what they are claiming. They are not going to. US is not going to abandon Europe. I mean, that is not going to happen because Europe is still, even though the global economic focal point is moving towards the Indo-Pacific, it is still Europe is still the second largest common market. I mean, so they are not going to abandon Europe simply because it is one of the most powerful and wealthiest regions in the world. So I think that is US. I think the US and the West are increasingly recognizing the China threat, and but unfortunately they keep getting dragged away. I think we all complained about the manner in which the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, but the part of the reason for the withdrawal from Afghanistan was to focus better on China. But to focus on China doesn't mean they're going to give up all of their other interests. And I think, therefore, to expect that they would abandon Europe to Russia is just, it doesn't happen in international politics. I mean, great powers don't simply abandon regions that are that valuable to another great power, in these kinds of situations. So,
meanwhile, the Chinese are laughing all the way to the bank. The Americans tied down in Europe, as is Europe, of course, the European Union.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So that is part of the problem that we face now, which is that if the United States' attention is diverted towards protecting Europe and to defending Europe, then it's a problem for us in the Indo-Pacific region. I mean, I think we have to worry about that. This is precisely the problem that this action creates for us. I think to some extent, Putin also recognizes this, and he sort of sees that as an opportunity because the United States and India and whatnot want to focus on China, and he sees that as an opportunity to do what he wants to do in Central Europe. And so that's, I think that I can fully understand Russian interests, but unfortunately, in this context, Russian interests and our interests don't coincide, and that is the problem that we're facing now.
So, do you think that if Russia's interests and India's interests don't coincide, you think India should begin to? So, India's in a jam, like you said earlier, but what should India do?
No, I think we've already been doing that. I mean, for the last several years, we have been trying to reduce our military dependence on Russia. That is the only real dependence that we have on Russia. We don't have otherwise a great level of economic dependence or any other kind of dependence. But that military dependence we have been attempting to reduce, but hasn't gone far enough. I would have liked it to have been faster. I would have liked it to have been we have moved along further than where we are. But that is already happening. I think at the official level there is a recognition that this is a problem. But when you have 70-80% of your military equipment coming from one country, it is going to take some time to reduce that dependence. Somebody told me recently that Egypt is still dealing with leftover Soviet equipment that they got in the 70s. I mean, the 60s and 70s. So, it's not easy to entirely disentangle yourself. But I think we need to be much more. We need to move much faster on that front in reducing our dependence. I think that's a key objective that we have to have going forward.
Ambassador Saran?
Yeah. No. Look. There's frankly no point in two Indians arguing with themselves what's happening 20,000 miles away. I mean,
that's a good point.
It just reflects on us. The point is, who's a threat to whom? We can discuss it ad nauseum, and maybe among the three of us not even arrive at a consensus. But the fact is that we have a government in India who takes all these inputs into account and arrives at a net assessment and then proceeds on the basis of that. Number one. And number two, if life was so simple, you would not have the kind of policies that France and Germany, the two largest European countries, are pursuing both towards Russia and towards China. There is a reason why France and Germany were guarantors or participants in the two Minsk agreements and in the Normandy format. You know it very well that the French-Russian relationship is an extremely healthy relationship. The German-Russian relationship is an extremely healthy relationship. there are severe differences within Europe on how to deal with Russia.
No, but I think his point is that that the India-Russia relationship is so close and so tight and hugely dependent on the purchase of Russian arms, but that India has to withdraw, and especially on this one, you have to sort of withdraw yourself a little bit.
I do not agree with that. What I just want to repeat again, you take a position that suits you. We are not sitting in a court of law trying to ascertain blame. I just want to know what is good for me. How do I cut my losses? How do I maximize my opportunities? And in future, because this has a precedent-setting quality, just as the invasion of Iraq had, or the Russian attacks on Syria in 2015. He stood in the UN General Assembly and said, from tomorrow, we are launching military missile attacks on Syria. So all these have precedent-setting quality. This is not the first time we are witnessing such an event. I mean, after all, we've gone through this. So all I'm saying is this: we have to ask ourselves, why does India be so keen that the Sri Lankan government should implement Article 13 of the Constitution? I ask you, why? Can you give me an answer?
Okay, we will. I promise you, we will have the Sri Lanka discussion another time. But before I let you both go, I just want very quick answers from the two of you. Imran Khan is in Moscow. Professor Rajagopalan, I mean, he must be, he's talking about it's almost like he's got a front seat to he's like a witness to what's going on. But isn't it a bit odd that Imran Khan is being invited to Moscow and Putin announces a military operation in Ukraine?
Well, not from Russia's point of view, clearly, because, Russia is doing what is in Russian interest. I have no... I'm not sort of going to judge what is in Russian interest. That's not up to me to judge. But clearly they see their self-interest as their national interest as being in having a closer relationship with China and its partners. And so they are definitely building that up. I mean, we have to look at it from the perspective of what our interests are. I mean, I think we can either see it for what it is, or we can ignore it. I mean, I think that's perfectly valid position to take. But I see that from the outside, of course, entirely from the outside, purely as an academic. Right. I see this as problematic. I mean, I do not know how many more signals we need about where Russia sees its interests are headed, and if we don't take cognizance of how Russia sees its interests, then we are likely to find ourselves in some difficulty going down after a couple of years.
Ambassador Saran, do you think that the Chinese would have told Imran Khan when he went to Beijing recently, or perhaps in any other way, to make this trip to Russia? And do you think that the Russians, that President Putin himself, I mean, this is nearly 30 years. After nearly 30 years that a Pakistani prime minister is going to Moscow. I mean, does it really matter, do you think, to the Russians? What do you think is the significance of this visit?
Yeah, I think Pakistan is a sideshow. I mean, I think to hyphenate their positions and what kind of positions they take on the bigger issues with us makes no sense. And everyone knows it. The Chinese know it, the Russians know it, the Americans know it. And so, frankly, what he says or does not say is hardly going to warm the cockles of President Putin's heart. But having said that, I think it is also a fact that there is a definite indication by China that Pakistan should be kept in play by Russia. But, I always come back to the fact that on the 15th of August, 2021, all we saw in simple terms was the NATO and the American forces handing over Afghanistan to Pakistan.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. This has been a fascinating discussion on not just the Ukraine crisis, but the world around us. Ambassador Pankaj Saran and Professor Rajesh Rajagopalan, thank you so much for joining me on the Print Debates.
Thank you.
Thank you.